With him on the ballot, we might see a surge in Asian Americans going to the polls where they otherwise hadn't.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex Cohen.
And I'm Sara Sadhwani.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Inside the Issues podcast. So much as always to dive into, including what seems to be the number one issue in the country, immigration.
Indeed it is, and it's going to play out in some hot congressional districts here in California. We're going to break down some of the hottest congressional races that are happening in America right here in the Golden State.
And who goes shopping at Target? Gavin Newsom does. And oh, you will not believe what happened when he did. We'll tell you all about it. But first, as we mentioned, we're going to start off on immigration, which I feel like, Sarah, you teach a class in this, you studied this forever. You know, it's always an election issue, but it's pretty rare, if it's ever happened, that it becomes the election issue. And look, we're far away from November. However, we're starting to see on the presidential level, it's pretty much looking like a general election right now. And a recent poll came out, a Harvard-Harris poll, that found now immigration actually outpaces the economy when it comes to the number one issue on voters' minds. Did that surprise you?
You know, it is a little surprising.
Yeah.
We haven't heard that much about immigration from immigrant rights activists in recent years.
Yeah.
I feel like the social justice conversation, especially here in Los Angeles, has really shifted. And, whereas that used to be a hot topic, we don't hear quite as much about it. And so instead, this narrative is being driven around the border and border security. And my guess is when you delve a little deeper into those polling numbers is this is the top issue, particularly for Republicans, for independents, for more moderate-leaning Democrats. I don't know that this is necessarily top of mind for all voters, but certainly for this important segment who's going to have to choose between a Biden and a Trump presidency and might want to have a more conservative sort of approach at the border.
Well, and I think it's a little chicken and egg, right?
Yeah.
Because look, no doubt immigration is an issue. A record number of migrants crossing the southern border last year. How many buses now have come to L.A. And to other places across the country? And yet, how much of it is also, so it is legitimately a situation, and yet you also, like you mentioned, you've got politicians and especially Republicans who see this is our in with American voters. And this is something that we've seen time and time again, a fear of immigrant invasion, which might be a good juncture to talk about the way that this is playing out locally. Just this week, Republican and Assembly candidate Carl DeMaio released this ad. And the first 30 seconds of the ad, I'm like, wait a minute, what year is this? How old am I? Because it was our former governor, Pete Wilson, who folks might recall, huge supporter of Prop 187, which looked to take away benefits from undocumented immigrants. And Carl DeMaio basically saying, Pete Wilson was right. And that is a
shocking,
bold stance to take here in California when many analysts have looked at Prop 187 and Pete Wilson is kind of the beginning of the end of the Republican
No,
Party.
I mean, there is academic research even looking at the impact of Prop 187, which has led to massive numbers of, in particular within the Latino community, folks naturalizing, becoming U.S. citizens, registering to vote. Just about 1 or 2 years ago, it was the 25th anniversary of Prop 187, the Latino caucus put out an ad saying, thank you, Pete Wilson. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you and your anti-immigrant rhetoric. So it is kind of a fascinating thing to see Carl DeMaio coming out with this piece. How beneficial is that really going to be? I mean, in some of these really conservative districts, sure, but statewide, absolutely not. That is not the place that California is today. But just going back to this piece, right, that DeMaio sort of raises is immigration is political fodder, right? We're not having a policy conversation here about like what works and what doesn't work and what's the broader reform that's needed. No, this is campaign central, right? And what we see here is Trump and the Republicans really trying to push immigration to be at the top of people's minds. And that's going to be the real challenge is like in 2024 is what is the number one pressing issue that elites are going to tell us we should be concerned about? Because in some places places it's going to be abortion, and in other places it's going to be immigration.
Well, I think this is a very good juncture to do something we do here every week. What's the word? This week it's 2 words or hyphenated.
Yeah. Split screen.
Right? So there's that split screen. And I'm hearing a lot of Democrats use that phrase this week. And I think there's this split screen for here's what's actually happening. And here's what folks, I would argue, on both sides of the aisle are telling you is happening. And let's talk about the strategy here on the national level in the presidential race, right? On the one hand, and we saw this, the Senate working on this border deal. A lot of folks saying really making tremendous progress.
Right.
It's just about to cross that finish line. And then we hear that Donald Trump says, no. If you reach a border deal with bipartisan support, that's going to look good for Joe Biden. I don't like that very much. And the next thing you know, it's falling apart.
Right. And just to back up, that border deal is that Republicans came out saying, hey, if you want to continue to give more money to Ukraine and support Ukraine, then we want to also have souped up border enforcement, right? Putting more money into the border, more militarization of the border. And Democrats saying, okay, well, let's look at that. That's not been Democrats' play in the past. It's always been about comprehensive immigration reform. Yeah. But here they said, well, look, Ukraine is an important piece for us. Yeah. And so we're gonna play ball. Let's play ball. And now you see Republicans backing away from this deal, like you said, right? Because Trump has told them, no. We actually don't want success. We don't want policy victories. This is all about campaign rhetoric.
But then it becomes this political chess game because then President Biden looks at it and he came out saying look, give me this border deal. I will shut things down on the border right now, which kind of got I feel like this was Joe Biden's moment of I am pulling over this car. And, I think we've all seen that. I don't know. I feel like we've seen this with our parents, the dad who was like, come on, kids, kids right now. And you're like, whoa. And that's President Biden on the border, which I think is really, really interesting. And I think there was this initial concern, is he going to then lose some of the more progressive part of the voter base? But I think I heard some interesting polling numbers that you might lose the sliver, but it's not like they're going to vote for Donald Trump or Nikki Haley instead. And also now at this point, I think people are a little bit more nuanced, and there's also kind of a split screen between what's happening at the border and the rest of what immigration reform might look like for things like DACA and things of that nature. And Latinos who say, you know what, I came over legally, right? I'm all for, don't assume that just because I'm Latino that I've got a problem with cracking down on the border.
And that's certainly true amongst Asian Americans as well. And I think that's going to be a key component for the Biden campaign moving forward, is that they're going to have to, if they're going to talk border security, then take the step and actually talk about the rest of immigration reform that needs to happen. I mean, God forbid we actually have a conversation about what's happening in Central America and a different approach altogether. We constantly go back to this policy of deterrence, which ultimately is never going to fix our immigration woes. However, minimally go back to having some conversation about comprehensive immigration reform and the needs. Even Donald Trump, when he was in office, attempted to end the DACA program. And this is a program, of course, for largely dreamers, college students, folks who have served in the military, to give them a working permit here in the United States. But that's all that it ever is. There's no pathway to citizenship. And even when Trump tried to end that program, there was outrage over it. That's an opportunity for Democrats to really come in and have a positive message on immigration if they have to have a conversation about immigration at all.
And they're also going to have a conversation because meanwhile, over in the House, you've got a bunch of Republicans who are trying to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. I want to take a quick moment, Sarah, to blow your mind. Alejandro Mayorkas, his dad was from Cuba. His mom, Romanian immigrant, Anita Mayorkas, who is my grade school Spanish teacher.
No way.
Yes.
No.
Hola, Señora Mayorkas. Yes.
That's wild.
First person that I ever learned Spanish from, and she winds up, having this son.
Wild. I was going to say, wow,
I did not go to school with.
It's really rolling off your tongue.
She did teach me how to roll my R's. The rest of it, I can't say how well I did on that front. But what's fascinating to talk again about this split screen of the Republicans saying, Mayorkas has got to go. I think it's been it's been over a century since anyone's tried to impeach impeach a cabinet member. The only time it was successful, the guy had already stepped down. I mean, no one thinks this is actually going anywhere. And again, like the Republicans might think that this looks good for them in an election year, but does it ultimately? If it winds up not going anywhere, Mayorkas is like, go ahead and try. Like, I'm just doing my job.
Right. And we see this again and again, right? I mean, even Republicans attempting to have the impeachment of Joe Biden, that in and of itself, I mean, they said even when McCarthy was still there saying, we don't really have anything, but let's move forward with this impeachment trial. Why not? Maybe, you know, it'll make him look bad. We see this with Mayorkas. We also are seeing this back and forth between Texas Governor Abbott, who has really tried to advance this notion that Texas is going to go it alone. Even the conservative Supreme Court last week came out saying, no, you can't. Immigration policy, including border policy, is the domain of the federal government.
Split screen, federal and state.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this actually leads to all sorts of constitutional questions for Texas and the United States. But there's the whole backdrop of so much of this I can't help but feel is about narrative, is about telling voters this is the issue that you need to be most concerned about, when maybe there's some other pieces that we need to be concerned. Maybe we need to be concerned about whether or not the election is going to be certified in 2024, or abortion rights, or other kinds of pieces that might be on the table as well.
But speaking of narrative, right, this impeachment hearing that happened earlier this week gave not just Republicans to make the case why they think Mayorkas has got to go, it also gave Democrats like Southern California's very own Robert Garcia an opportunity to go after former president, now candidate, Donald Trump. It was a really interesting committee hearing earlier this week. Robert Garcia brought his props. And for those who were listening and not watching us, basically had this giant blown up cardboard cutout thing, whiteboard thing, that showed a picture of an alligator in a body of water and like these crazy spiky fences. And Robert Garcia using this as an opportunity to say, hey, you think Mayorkas is bad on border security? Let's recall what the former president did. Let's take a listen.
Donald Trump actually has said that he wants to build alligator moats along the border. That's one of his incredible ideas. Another idea that Donald Trump has promoted is he actually wants to electrify the border fence and maybe even put some spikes on the border.
And I actually had the chance to speak with Robert Garcia not long ago, and he was the one who planted the idea of that split screen. He's talking about it while he's stumping for President Biden. So is Kamala Harris. This notion of we've got an incredibly polarized decision to make in 2024 on a number of issues, including immigration and on a number of levels, not just the presidential levels. You know, of course, a lot of congressional contests happening this year. And just this week, the DCCC, the Democratic organization, released their official, what they call the red to blue list. Here are a bunch of seats that we feel like could go from Republican to Democrat if we want to regain control of the House. And 4 out of 17, I don't know the math on that, but it's pretty, you know, it's almost 25%. Are California congressional races.
They sure are. And some really exciting ones, you know, CA 13 up in the Central Valley that John Duarte, the Republican John Duarte, currently holds, is being challenged by Adam Gray. The 22nd district in the Valley, also a second-time matchup, or actually maybe even a third-time matchup from the Republican David Valadao, who is really interesting because he's really kind of moderated over the years, seeing these challenges from Rudy Salas. CA 27 in the Antelope Valley, Mike Garcia there. This has been a hot district for quite some time. Out in the Inland Empire, the 41st Congressional District, where Ken Calvert has become really, at risk of being knocked off. Now, this was interesting to me, these 4 that were selected, because one that is not on this list is from Orange County, the 45th Congressional District, which Michelle Steele holds. It's a very purple sort of district. She has a challenge from several Democrats right now at the primary stage, but I was surprised that one didn't also make the list.
Why do you think?
Well, you know, it's interesting to me in particular. She has a challenge from a woman who is half Vietnamese and half Mexican American. And so the way that this district was drawn, and remember, I did serve on the redistricting commission, so I am intimately aware of the kinds of communities that are in there. This is a district that spans from Little Saigon, the cities of Westminster and Garden Grove and Fountain Valley, up to Artesia, which includes Little India. Now, if you know anything about the Asian American community, Vietnamese Americans are known as being really conservative. But when you have a challenge from someone who's actually Vietnamese American, who has Nguyen is a part of her last name, that could change things. And so I was really surprised to not see that one being on the list per se. So anyway, I think there's a lot happening here. We've seen challenges in all of these districts in 2022, but that was not a presidential election year. All of these districts, I believe, went to Biden as they are now configured post redistricting in 2020. So if we get that same level of turnout, and if Biden is able to pull in that same level of support that he did in 2020, these are districts that definitely could flip. Yeah.
And now pivoting to a potentially blue to red, who knows, or at least a very interesting race, of course, at the U.S. Senate race level. One of 3 Democratic members of Congress running is Katie Porter, which means her seat is open. And on the Democratic side of the ballot, you've got Dave Min and Joanna Weiss. LA Times just endorsed for David Min this week. And Joanna Weiss now, I think, kind of feeling the heat on that. They just released an ad this week really highlighting the fact that he got a DUI.
Right. And going negative.
Going very negative. Yeah. But, with some folks, it's working. OC Supervisor Katrina Foley saying, look, in this day and age, nobody should be drinking and driving, period, full stop. Right. And then you've got Scott Baugh on the Republican side. It's a really interesting mix.
It is. And so this is a district that became a little bit more red, still very much a purple to blue district, but definitely a little bit more red after redistricting. Scott Baugh, the former assembly member, Katie Porter had a tight race with him. And let's not forget, Katie Porter, whether you love her or hate her, if she's not your Senate pick, that's okay. Yeah. But in that district, she was a phenom, right? With her and her whiteboard, she's been able to raise millions of dollars to run her campaigns. And it's a real question of, even if it's Dave Min or Joanna Weiss, are either one of them going to be able to pull in the kind of support that Katie Porter was able to do so? Now, Porter herself has endorsed Dave Min from the get-go. He's currently the state senator in that area. And the key component to that district is it's both coastal, which tends to be kind of more demographically white, but those coastal districts went to Biden. Irvine, which has a large Asian American population. And so that's where most folks who are watching this race really are looking to Dave Min to say, ooh, can he go and tap in on voters who maybe aren't regular voters. Maybe they didn't even go out to support Katie Porter necessarily, but because he's on the ballot, and this is actually a lot of what my research would show, is that with him on the ballot, we might see a surge in Asian Americans going to the polls where they otherwise hadn't. And so that's my nerdy research side is super excited about that.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. And I got to wonder too, no matter who prevails in that race, Katie Porter has just created such a name and persona. It'll be very interesting to kind of see, right? Like the woman with the whiteboard, I feel like there's this very kind of Bikram yoga reaction. Like people either super love her or super find it too much. And just one more note on the ad front, new polling now is finding Steve Garvey and Katie Porter neck and neck in that Senate race at number 2 after Adam Schiff. And I can't help but wonder if that isn't due in no small part to Steve Garvey's debate performance that we saw last week and I talked about with the Anhide Dudsmore. And now Adam Garvey. It's Adam Garvey. Whoa. Talk about split screen. It's splitting my brain. Adam Schiff has just released a brand new ad. I heard it, of all things, on the Lincoln Project podcast at the very beginning. I heard this voice. I'm like, who is this? He sounds familiar, but it's Adam Schiff. And a video ad that's contrasting himself with Steve Garvey. Katie Porter put out a mighty spicy tweet in response to it that I was like, whoa. And it made me wonder about some of the things that I've heard about her campaign, that there are people who might align with her politically, but she's become so strident, not just in her attacks of corporate America, but now her attacks on Adam Schiff. Is that going to be too much for some voters?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think switching to Senate race a little bit here is that Adam Schiff is smart to start putting out those kinds of ads, right? He would probably do well amongst Lincoln Project style Republicans, of which there's a whole lot of them in California, right? I mean, certainly, yes, we have the Trump MAGA Republicans in California. There's plenty of disaffected Republicans here in the Golden State who are not crazy about the kind of politics that a Trump is going to put out, and might find a home with Adam Schiff.
And last but not least, someone who is not running for re-election or election this year, but it is my favorite political story of the week, possibly of 2024, maybe even of the past 5 years. In case you missed it, Governor Gavin Newsom, big proponent of a measure that will be on the ballot, Prop 1, and he was doing a Zoom press conference about it with a bunch of mayors, and I guess they're waiting for London Breed of San Francisco and some other mayor, I can't remember who, to kind of dial in. So, I mean, we've all been on these Zoom meetings like where you're waiting for the event to start, so you just start jibba-jabbing, and I don't know how they got to this point, but what I do know, because it got captured on the social media, is that Gavin Newsom tells a story about going shopping in a Target. Yes, you heard me right. Shopping in a Target. I mean, talk about a split screen, like Gavin at the Capitol, Gavin at the Target. I don't know which Target. Apparently, he spent like $380, I think. Like, I don't know what he was getting. There's so many questions. I can just imagine
him with a big cart full of like toilet paper and
grooming products, maybe some hair gel, maybe like we know we're in a budget deficit. I better like cut back on my, I don't know. Anyway, so he's in the checkout line, and apparently the clerk is ringing him up, and there's a shopper who drops some things and picks them up and then walks out with them and clearly does so without paying. And the clerk's like, oh yeah, happens all the time. And Governor Gavin Newsom, I can totally picture the scene. He's like, well, wait, why? Why aren't you stopping him? Why aren't you doing something? And the clerk, I kid you not, says to him, it's all the governor's fault. And this is a party line that you hear all the time from Republicans. Gavin Newsom in California and Democrats are soft on crime, and that's why people are doing these smash and grabs and walking out of Walgreens and Walmarts and Rite Aids and Targets. And apparently this clerk was completely unaware that they were speaking to the governor, Gavin Newsom, which I gotta say too, right? Like, okay, there's a lot of white guys out there, but like, I think he's got a rather distinctive look. Yeah. But at some point it clicks in for the clerk, who's like, oh my God,
you're Gavin Newsom.
And then asked to take a picture. And the governor's telling this whole story. He's very dramatic. He's very animated. And he was like, the heck I'm taking a picture with you. I want to talk to your manager. And winds up, it sounds to me, recapping what he said in his recent budget reproposal, where he got asked about retail theft and said, hey, everyone's blaming Prop 47. When you talk about penalties, ours are actually way lower than some of the ones in a bunch of other states. I think we come in at number 10. And he starts giving the spiel to the clerk. Anyway, who knows how much longer he would have gone on with this story. But then the moderator was like, we've got Mayor Breed now on the line. Let's get going. But man, oh man, what I wouldn't have given. I've been a fly on the wall in that Target.
We need some footage, Target footage on that one.
Clean up on aisle 6. Well, friends, that is it for this week's edition of the Inside the Issues podcast. If you got something fun in a Zoom meeting, we'd love to hear about it. I am on social media at Alex Cohen in LA.
And I'm at Sara Sadhwani.
And we'll see you here next week. The Inside the Issues podcast is a Spectrum News One production. Crystal Goss is our producer. Our senior digital producer is Yasmin Cruz. Nathaniel Leathers is our editor, and the executive in charge of production is Daisy Espinoza.